All right, next panel, the future of Oregon cannabis. I will first lead off with kind of good news, the kind of big picture, some things we can all be proud of. First, I want to mention when we first legalized or first started working on Measure 91 to legalize cannabis here in Oregon, there were 12,808 Oregonians who were arrested and cited for cannabis in 2012. And those are the latest stats when we started the campaign. Last year, using those same statistics, for people arrested for cannabis, where cannabis was like the reason they were arrested, that was the most harmful thing they were charged with, it's down to 47, all right? So 47 people arrested and cited for cannabis last year, all right? And 16 adults, that's it. 21 juveniles, 16 adults. So we can be proud of that. We can also be proud of the fact that, as Senator Merkley mentioned in his video this morning, we have doubled what the state projected tax revenue would bring in. They projected $40 million at the most every year. We're on pace to bring in $80 million every year. So we doubled that projection, funding schools, drug treatment programs, putting that money to good use. I think we could put it to other good uses as well. And we've created, I think Governor Brown projects we've created 19,000 or so cannabis jobs that have been created. But we got more work to do. We need to take care of patients. We need to sell more cannabis, both in-state and out-of-state, and address some other issues. So let me introduce the panel at large and then kick it off. First, I have a lot of experience working with all these fellas. They're all great people. On the far end, Sam Chapman, Director of New Revenue Coalition. Sam helped lead the effort. Give it up for Sam. Thank you. Sam helped lead the effort to legalize medical cannabis dispensaries in the legislature, and now he's at the legislature leading the effort to legalize cannabis cafes and other similar businesses. Think about the cannabis model for winery tours, distillery tours, things like that, to bring more tourism to the state, provide more jobs for our industry. Next to him, Casey Houlihan, Oregon Retailers and Cannabis Association. Casey worked with us on Measure 91. He does a great job working with the legislature to protect the industry, the retailers who are the point of contact with the general public, and in many ways they're the ambassadors for the program. Next to him, Adam Smith with the Craft Cannabis Alliance. Adam works with the mom and pops, and he is leading the charge with One Fix Cannabis to make sure that Oregon is ready when the time is right, and I think the time is now, to start exporting cannabis across state and international lines. There you go. Thank you, Adam. And then one of our biggest allies in the legislature, Oregon Senator Floyd Prozanski. All right, and Sam, why don't you take it away, talk about what we're working on with the New Revenue Coalition and the reasons why we got to legalize and regulate cannabis cafes and other businesses here in Oregon.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. Again, Sam Chapman, New Revenue Coalition. If you want to learn more about us, then newrevenuecoalition.com. So we founded the New Revenue Coalition because there needed to be an organized pack of industry members along with folks who are not in the cannabis industry who may just be consumers or social justice advocates or housing advocates or equity advocates to really reframe the issue and the current problem that we have with our existing model of legalization, which that more or less it is a privileged form of legalization, and that if you don't own your own home, there's likely no legal place for you to consume your cannabis. So that's something that we're working on addressing in this legislative session. We've got a bill into Legislative Council right now that would do a couple of things. And really quickly, I just want to get a raise of hands. How many retailers are in the room? Retailers? Production? Processing? Cool. You stand to benefit from this bill. Every single one of you stands to benefit from this bill. Let me tell you why. The first and main core concept that we're looking to do with this bill is to exempt cannabis from the Indoor Clean Air Act. For those of you who don't know, cannabis was added in 2015, and that means that you can't consume cannabis inside. Very straightforward. Now, that created, again, quite a few problems for folks who don't own their own homes, especially if you're in any type of government-assisted housing. There was a law that was just passed federally that all federal housing is now smoke-free. And so the current law disproportionately affects people of low economic status and people of color. And I think that we've really got an opportunity to address this in the upcoming session. So what does the bill do? One, it allows retailers to co-locate a consumption venue at their premise. Two, it extends that same ability to processors and producers. If you want to have a brewery or vineyard model at your farm or processing facility, we think you should be able to do that, just like the wine and brewery industries. Three, delivery to hotels. The current law does not allow delivery to hotels. We think that that's something that should be allowed. If you're a tourist and you're coming to town, you should not have to walk around the corner, smoke in an alley, in a park, or in your rented car. Those are public safety issues, in our opinion, and we think that those need to be addressed with sensible solutions. And three, cannabis temporary event licenses. Again, this is not reinventing the wheel. We have this for liquor now. The language that we've used and put in the bill that we have at the moment directly reflects existing language for alcohol temporary event licenses. And so that is the general concept of the bill. And I think that the really important thing for people here to recognize is that this is not a done deal. Right? This is actually the second, and maybe depending on how much context you have of previous sessions, second and a half attempt at pushing this through the legislature. And let me give you a little context. In 2017, I helped author and ran a bill, Senate Bill 307, that sought to simply create a space for people to consume at retailers, right? Now, the folks that we need to work with, and that we at least need to get to neutral, are public health and law enforcement, and mainly public health. They have a lot of the same reefer madness concerns that we have heard for decades. They also have some legitimate concerns that we very much need to address. And I think that it's really important that the industry knows that, in that there will be concessions in these conversations, right? If I had it my way, you'd be able to buy cannabis and alcohol and consume it in the same place, right? We're not there yet. Right? So there are incremental aspects of this political process that we need to go through. In 2017, we took our first step in that process. So we had a bill that would allow this to happen at retailers. We had 3 stakeholder group meetings. And in every meeting, we compromised. We compromised. We compromised. And by the third meeting, the bill had been watered down so much to where it just codified existing law, which in my non-legal opinion, means if you're outside, not on an OLCC licensed premise, and you're not in view of the public, you can consume cannabis. That was what public health told us that they needed to go neutral. Well, it turns out they weren't very genuine in telling us that, because they still opposed our bill. So we're coming in with a very different strategy for the 2019 session. That's politics, right? I do my best every day to make sure that I don't take those things personally. That's part of the game, and we can play that game too. And I think that part of the new strategy this time around is, one, we're asking for everything we want, right? Everything that we deserve. And we understand that that may be a tall order for some folks who may not quite understand who we are, and that we're also normal people. We just have a different choice we choose a different way to relax, or we just, we're not the same exact people. But we do believe that it's something that we deserve the freedom to have. So basically, what we're doing is we're going to work with public health and law enforcement. We're genuinely coming back to the table with them. We had a first, what I believe to be a very productive work group meeting. I think that we've got a real shot at getting this through the building this session. But it's not going to be done without 2 major things. One, a well-organized and well-financed lobbying effort. And 2, a community organizing, bottom-up lobbying effort. This is not an issue that is going to get passed just through top-down lobbying. This is going to require constituents to be activated, consumers to talk to their representatives, to set up meetings and say, I deserve a legal place to consume this legal product. And if we can't do that, this will not pass. It's that simple. And so if you live here in Oregon and you are willing to contact your representative, send an email, host a house party, volunteer in one way or another, if you've got a special skill, I want to hear from you. Because it's going to take all of us to get this done. And it's not just going to be the lobbyists in the building. It's going to need to be the people and the voters that let their representatives know that they want this. So the other aspect of the strategy is if we are not able to get something through the building this session, we're simply going to go to the ballot. That ruffles a lot of folks' feathers, to be honest. But it's a card that we have to keep in our back pocket. If folks that we are required to work with in the building are not willing to work with us, that's fine. There's another avenue that we can go to. And frankly, with 578 retailers in the state, most of which would stand to benefit in one form or another from this bill, we think that those retailers act as pretty great conduits to constituents, to consumers, to voters. And there's plenty of campaign plans out there that can show us how to utilize those connectors to organize, a groundswell of constituent support the legislature has never seen on a cannabis issue like this before. This issue of consumer equity is one that stands to mobilize consumers in ways that you've never seen before. And I think that on top of the opportunities that are presented in that type of organizing model, it also really is something that you should consider as a business decision. If you're in the cannabis industry, you already know your business is politics, and all politics are local. And if you're not paying attention to local politics, you're probably not paying attention to your business very much, right? The same is to be said for this issue, and I think it's really important that people understand that. Lobbying isn't necessarily the most glorious thing in the world, but that's how you get shit done. And that's what we need from everyone. We need everyone to be able to pitch in resources, time, connections, whatever you have. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm not going to have a whole lot of time to hang out after this. I've got to leave town, but I'll give you my email right now, nrcpac@gmail.com, nrcpac@gmail.com. I'm happy to meet with anyone and everyone. If you want to endorse our campaign, we're happy to throw your logo up. We'd love to get a statement of support, and we'd love to work with you on figuring out how to activate your constituent base to help make cannabis consumption a reality in Oregon in 2019. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. NewRevenueCoalition.com. Check it out. nrcpac@gmail.com. Sam, just one quick question for you. You mentioned in a dream world you'd like to see cannabis and alcohol served at the same establishments. Will that same establishment be able to have axe throwing as well?
Who all went to the axe throwing last night? Did anyone from the OLCC go to the axe throwing last night? All right, I'm just saying, like, if we can legally drink beer and throw axes and just sign a waiver, like, the safer alternative is smoking weed and throwing axes, so let's look into that.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Adam Smith, take us away on why we need to export cannabis and how we're going to do it.
Hello. I may standing up. I'm from New York, so I talk fast, and I only have a little bit of time and a lot of stuff to go over, so try to stay with me. I know it's early in the morning. My name is Adam Smith. I'm the founder and executive director of the Craft Cannabis Alliance. We are a mission-driven trade association representing companies large and small that are majority Oregon-owned, that have made a commitment to sustainability, ethical business and employment practices, positive community engagement, and ending the drug war. I'm not here to talk about the Craft Cannabis Alliance today, but that's who we are. Before I get into export, I just want to note something, because I'm not sure who will say this from the stage today, but the FBI numbers came out, and Anthony referenced the fact that we've only arrested 47 people last year in Oregon for cannabis, but nationwide, those numbers actually went up this past year. We arrested over 600,000 people across the country, so if you're in the cannabis industry, if you make your living from the cannabis industry, okay, I know in Oregon we're not making a ton of money from the cannabis industry, but if we have our fingers on this pot of gold, on this bag of gold, but the only reason that's true is because we're standing on a mountain of 80 years of ruined lives and destroyed community, and we have a moral, ethical, cultural, and financial obligation to make sure that we are funding ending the drug war writ large, not just opening our next market. So, may I suggest, if you're looking for ways to do that, may I suggest Students for Sensible Drug Policy, NORML, the Drug Policy Alliance, Marijuana Policy Project, whether that's local or national, think about being part of the solution. Now, Oregon. How we got here. How many people here do business in Oregon? All right, awesome. How many people here would be in favor of being able to export products out of Oregon? Excellent, we got a friendly crowd. All right, I'm gonna stand up. I'm not gonna stand up because I leave the photo. All right. So how do we get here? Oregon decided, and I think it was a smart idea, we decided to legalize the industry we had here in Oregon. We actually ran a campaign called Go Legal. And the campaign was not about bring your big multinational here, buy up a bunch of farms, and set up shop. The campaign was that we had an industry here, have had an industry here for generations. And we wanted to make it feasible for all of those folks that have been participating to continue participating on the legal side. This was a good instinct. We legalized the industry we had. The state said, come on in, and thousands of people did. The problem is it turned out the industry we had was largely an export industry. And so we had medical, obviously, right? But for generations, we have been feeding, the West Coast has been feeding, the nation's cannabis desires and doing it well. And so we roped in all of this product. We said, go ahead, everybody grow. And we turned around and, with cheap and easy licensing, and boom, we have a glut, right? Billy Williams, the U.S. Attorney here, calls it a problem. I like to call it a bounty, right? We have a bounty, but if you think things are bountiful now, wait till California gets their licensing on track. It's going to be very bountiful on the West Coast, right? Oregon is an export state, and we have always been an export state, and that is how this will function going forward, and that's the future for Oregon. So, but what we have right now is we have a number of problems. Number one, we have the problem that we've had since the beginning of Prohibition, which is we are exporting, like it or not. The second problem we have is that we have producer counties that don't have enough resources coming in to enforce regulation. And the third problem is that we are on the brink of an economic catastrophe in Oregon, a real-time economic crisis. We have hundreds of millions of dollars of local capital that is on the verge of being wiped out, that stands to be wiped out over the next 12 to 24 months, right? And this is not Nike's local capital or Intel's local capital. This is the local capital of thousands of people who have gone all in to be part of this legal industry, right? And if this was any other industry, if we had this kind of local capital and thousands of jobs at imminent risk, we would have political leadership coming from everywhere screaming at the federal government to open up markets for our hazelnuts or filberts, for our salmon, for our grass seed, whatever it is. But it's cannabis, so it's touchy. But it's not touchy, right? We are in the midst of a sea change nationally. A couple of months ago, New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo came out and said, it's not a matter of if New York should legalize cannabis, it's how New York should legalize cannabis, right? Well, right now, under the current system, the way things are, if New York wants to legalize cannabis tomorrow, they would have to create from scratch a production industry approximately 4 to 5 times larger than Oregon's production industry, right? That's neither competitive nor economically feasible, right? I mean, you can grow oranges in New York too if you want, right? It's not a good business plan, right? And so, not saying that folks in New York shouldn't grow, but they should grow if they believe they can be competitive with West Coast cannabis coming, because West Coast cannabis is going to come. And it may take until federal prohibition ends, but that day is coming. And so we need to look economically toward what is the future of this industry. So, to fix all of those problems, right? So let me just go back. The U.S. Attorney Billy Williams said, this is out of control, right? There's diversion from the legal market, there is illicit growing, there is organized crime, and and to some extent that is not untrue, right? But it has been such since the beginning of Prohibition, right? Prohibition didn't work, it doesn't work now. The state is not going to suddenly become able to make Prohibition work, right? So the question is not should Oregon export or not, the question is how is Oregon going to export? Is it going to export ad hoc, illegally, unregulated, in ways that make everybody, including the U.S. Attorney, unhappy? Or are we going to do this in a way that is regulated, going into states that want it, into licensed hands to go to adults, where we get revenues back? That is the only question. So we have decided that it is time to push that question. And we have started a campaign called One Fix Cannabis, where one stands for Oregon Needs Export. Okay? And and let me tell you right up front, our goal is to export product legally from Oregon by the end of 2020. We plan to send product out of Oregon by the end of 2020. Because if it takes 4 years to get to export, or 5 years, then there's a really good chance that 80 or 90% of the local industry here will be no more. Right? We have large companies that have come in here, and they have every right to be here, and they're buying up farms and buying up retail and buying up brands, right? And they're not here because they think they're going to get rich selling cannabis to Oregonians, right? It's not too much hyperbole to say it's possible that the last profitable dollar has already been made selling cannabis to Oregonians. Right? They are here because there is an Oregon brand of cannabis, and when those walls come down, we are going to have a multi-billion-dollar export industry. Right? But there's a really good chance that if it takes too long, there's going to be some small number of large, deep-pocketed companies that have outlasted and bought out everybody else who will own the Oregon brand globally. And we will turn around and have this multi-billion-dollar industry, and we will say, wow, what a shame we don't really have a significant ownership stake here. Now, I have good friends that work for some of these large companies, and if we took a snapshot of the Oregon industry right now, and that's how this went forward, with the mix that we have of outside companies and inside companies, we would have a healthy ecosystem. But we're not trending in that direction. And the longer it takes us to open up new markets, the harder and harder it's going to get for us to have an industry that is of Oregon. And make no mistake, the reason that Oregon has a brand globally for our cannabis is exactly because of that artisan, craft, right, industry that has worked for generations to create the best cannabis on the planet, right? And so it is valuable to everyone for that to survive. So what are we doing? I'm going to close this up. What are we doing? The One Fix Cannabis campaign, it's a 3-step process. The first thing we absolutely have to do is we have to pass a bill, and Senator Prozanski, I believe, is going to help us do that, that is going to allow us, that is going to make it legal under state law to approve transfers for the governor's office through LCC to approve transfers out of state. Right now, if cannabis became legal tomorrow federally, it would still be illegal under Oregon law for us to approve out-of-state transfers. We need to get that out of the way. That doesn't get product out of the state, but it gets the legislature out of the way so that when the time comes, we are able to jump on that opportunity, right? And the other thing we need to understand is that the situation at the federal level is fluid. Right? It's not about waiting for the federal government to legalize cannabis. We have never made an advance in cannabis policy in the last 40 years because the federal government decided to make something legal and said, here, go ahead, do it. Never. Not once. They have not legalized medical yet. We would still be waiting. We can't wait, right? So what we need to do is make it legal in Oregon. We need to pass this bill. It is vital. It's a necessary first step. That campaign to pass the bill is also a platform to tell this story nationally about the future of economics in cannabis and find our partners around the state that are going to lobby for their state to allow import, whether that's New York or New Jersey or Nevada or Utah's medical program or Oklahoma's medical program. We need to punch a hole in the wall. We need to make a transfer from Oregon's system into another state's legal system that the states approve and the federal government lets happen. Once that happens, we are in an entirely different world. And so we need to bring it right up to the line and look at the federal government and force them to make a decision. Are you going to enforce against 2 state governors that have decided they're ready to move cannabis and that this is going to help clear up the illicit market? And that's where we need to get, okay? And so I want to thank, by the way, you're going to hear from Casey Houlihan from Orca. They are our partners in One Fix Cannabis. They are doing an amazing job. We just met with Sun Growers Guild down south, and they are going to join the campaign. I don't know if Pete is here. We had a terrific meeting. I'm really excited to work with those guys. We can do this. There is a sign-on letter, okay? And when we go to the legislature and we ask for, things like social use, the first thing people are going to ask is where is the industry on this? We need to get 1,000 license holders on this sign-on letter. You go to onefixcannabis.org. It takes you 30 seconds. Sign on to the letter. Really important. We need to be able to show. That this is something everybody wants. And then we are going to lobby when the legislative session starts, and we are going to get this done. Okay, so I'm going to pass this on, but please be part of both of these things. We need to bring people into the state to show them the incredible world-class level of our cannabis and let them go home and spread our fame and our brand. And then we need to be able to send it to them and get it on their shelves, whether it's in a state that's already legal or the next state that becomes legal. We can do this by 2020, and again, it's up to the industry to stand up together, and I hope you will. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. OneFixCannabis.org. Let's make it happen. All right, Casey, you're up, brother.
Thanks, Anthony. My name is Casey Houlihan. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association. We represent over 350 cannabis businesses in the industry across the state, many of whom are retailers, but we also have producers, processors, you name it. Several of whom I believe are here today. Yeah? Great, yeah. And if you're not a member, talk to us after. We'll be here all day. I'm going to echo a lot of what you just heard from both of these speakers. There's a lot that we're working on for the upcoming legislative session in 2019, and it's going to be a unique session in a couple of ways that I wanted to point out. This will be the first long session that we've had in the legislature for some time without a specific committee dedicated to focusing on cannabis-related policy. That does mean that we are going to be competing with traditional industries and other interest groups at the Capitol for basic bandwidth, for room on committee hearings, and just to make sure that we can get their time and attention for this. So a lot of what we're seeing is the culmination of efforts from a lot of the folks up here that they've been doing for years at this point, and that's exactly the type of time frame that we're typically looking at for getting these substantive policy measures passed. It's years after years. And so one of the other reasons I'm very excited about this upcoming session is that we've also made more progress than ever before. We have more advocates and allies on our side than ever before. We've added more legislators to the positive columns for all two of these legislation bills that these guys are talking about, as well as the others that I'm going to mention here. Our number one focus, as Adam pointed out, is also going to be making sure that we can get a reasonable export policy for this state, because as you all know, we are wildly saturated on the production side, and the biggest solution that we could possibly have would be to get that to another state that needs it. We can get more money into the pockets of the growers here, and actually I think at the Capitol we're probably going to start referring to that bill as the Oregon Cannabis Industry Full Employment Act of 2019, because there's nothing else we could do to help the jobs outlook in this state, in this industry. To Sam's point as well, and this is actually one of the other elements that's going to be new, we have more forces and more groups that are coalesced around a lot of these specific issues and driving support for these specific issues than we've seen historically, and that's a really effective mechanism at adding support. So that's another area where, especially when we're talking about something very controversial like social consumption, where clearly there have been some stakeholders, particularly the public health advocates, who have been very obstinate in their opposition to this. This is another area where after years of making small progress and getting more allies on our side, that I think this is going to be the best chance we've had yet to get this type of bill through, and it's really important that we all get behind it and make sure that we can show our support for those lobbying efforts as well. A couple of the other things that I know that we've discussed in past sessions that our association is looking to bring back up as well is actually a bill that was introduced by Senator Prozanski in 2017. I believe SB 301 at the time, which would have eliminated employment discrimination for off-hours cannabis use. And this is an important one because there's still a great deal of folks out there who are concerned about losing their job or employment or financial security if they consume cannabis. This is another example, as Sam pointed out, of privileged legalization. So we think that this is something that everybody should be able to have access to. Nobody should be punished or deprived of an economic opportunity because they choose a safer legal intoxicant in the state of Oregon. So this is an area where consumers can really directly provide a lot of input and carry quite a bit of the weight of these measures we're trying to advocate for in session. Sam had appropriately pointed out that a grassroots effort on this can be extremely impactful to legislators, and especially on an area like this where so many consumers directly would be impacted by this type of policy. This is one where we, especially as retailers, can reach out to our consumers to make sure they understand, to advocate for their interests, and to talk to their state representatives and their state senators to make sure that they support these bills as well. Lastly, I also wanted to talk about another bill that we're working on to vacate automatically past cannabis convictions for folks that had been victimized by the prohibition on cannabis and the war on drugs historically. There is a path right now for getting those types of charges expunged. However, it is fairly circuitous, it's fairly time-consuming, and it's relatively costly, and as such, many folks have not taken advantage of it that could. So this is something that we would like to have done at the state level in statute so that it can happen automatically for those past offenses, and folks don't have to jump through a series of hoops to have something stricken from the record that shouldn't have been there in the first place. I wear two hats in the industry. I also work with BDS Analytics, which is a market research and data firm. So I do operate kind of at the cross-section of policy and data. So there was a couple things I wanted to mention, just in terms of consumer power from the cannabis consumer perspective. There are so many lobbying groups right now that happen nationally, that work nationally, that are essentially consumer organizations. I think of the NRA as one of the most powerful typically that folks think of, and that's because gun sales are massive. 30% of Americans currently report that they own a firearm, and estimated right now between $9 and $10 billion in North American gun sales. However, in states that have legalization policy, consumer insight research that we have done has shown that 32% of folks in those legal states have consumed cannabis in the last 6 months. And in 2017, legal cannabis sales were $9.7 billion in North America. In about 4 years, they're anticipated to go up to $24 billion. So we're going to be running circles around some of the biggest interest groups in the country in terms of how many sales they're bringing in relative to ours. And this is an area where you can vote with your voice, you can vote with your dollar, you can connect with your representative, but we are a seasoned constituency that at this point needs to have our voice heard, and we need to finish the job of legalization that we started 4 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Casey, how can people find you online? Casey, how can people find you online to get involved?
We're at OregonCannabisRetailers.com, and we also have a table right out there. You can chat with us all day.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from our ally, and what from your perspective, Senator Prozanski, from inside the legislative building.
All right, thank you. So I think it's important to kind of take a step back to look at where we were and where we are today. I think Adam brought up a very distinct point of the diversion that we have. Back in 2015, after the Measure 91 was passed in 14, that's when we had a super committee that was opened up. There are 10 members, 5 senators, and 5 representatives. I was one of the vice chairs of that committee. During that process, it became very clear that we needed to do certain things to ensure that we weren't going to have this glut of product on the market. We had testimony that told us that we already had within the medical program that had been in existence since '98 when it was passed and started growing in '99, so about 14 years, 3 to 5 times as much product, flower, already being grown in the state without even going into the recreational system. And that was based on research that an individual at OSU had done. What we took from that and what I took from that was that we needed to have a bill that was going to limit new production for growers to limit new people coming in out of state. So basically a residency requirement. We had a bill that actually was going to require a 4-year residency program, so we could in fact allow for the mom and pops throughout this state that were the roots of this program of what we're now benefiting from to be able to transition into the open market. What we're going to also do is not keep someone from coming into the state, but they're going to get what would be called a vertical license, a license that would allow them to grow for their own need and use, but they would not be able to flood the market with their flower or their extracts or any other processing into the open market. They'd have to sell it through their own retail. That would self-regulate them as to how much they grew because they could only sell it within their own retail outlet or through their own processing. We know that that would limit the addition and would allow for everyone else who are Oregonians before we had this transition coming in to actually have a place at the table, have an existing market, and actually be able to come in from being on the outs and being in a regulated industry. Now, what we have seen since then is this glut. We know what we're dealing with, and so in 2017, I did in fact introduce a bill, Senate Bill 1042. So if you're interested in looking at it, you can go to the Oregon legislative website, and you go to the bills, go to the sessions first, pick the 2017 session, and then look up SB 1042. What 1042 called for was to establish a process for the governor to be able to enter into compacts with adjacent states that had marijuana programs, either medical and or recreational programs. So here in Oregon, we now have adjacent states of California, Nevada, and Washington. This would in fact allow for those who are in the process of growing that want to be able to get a return for their product to actually be able to have it go across state lines. Now what we've realized is that through this drafting, we needed to have a mechanism that would keep it from being exclusively regulated by the feds. and that is through ground transportation. It's my belief from working with our legislative council that we could in fact do that, because only air and marine, meaning water, transportation is exclusively regulated by the feds. So unfortunately, even though I got the bill passed out of my Senate Judiciary Committee, it went to another committee, and the leadership chose not to move the bill. That bill will be reintroduced. We will be looking at potential modifications, and Adam says one of the things that we want to be is an exporting state. This is my vision as well, because we have seen it, we know it will be there, and the reality, there's little that any other state's going to be able to do to outdo our state and our growers, because they're so renowned as to what they do and with the success that they've had in the medical application. So why would a state that has no medical growing program want to try to establish that program? Now, clearly they can do that. If New York wants to do that, so be it. But guess what? We know that we have a brand. We know that we have growers who have been able to identify attributes of their strains to help individuals and medical needs. And as I heard from veterans in front of my committee, the bottom line is they want to be able to function. They want to be part of society. They want to be able to take care of their families. They can't do it on opiates, but they can do it if they have access to quality strains of marijuana that actually will benefit them. So that's one of the things we want to do, and this is now taken off to another step. Just this week, I had individuals coming in from California who represents the rural counties who are looking at 1042 as how they can actually start working on their side of the state boundary to actually implement that, so we can see that. So you may see the first two states actually doing this would be between us and California, but I still want to have that opening for everywhere else, meaning adjacent states. Everywhere else, I'm afraid it's going to take a piece of legislation on the federal side. I think it's very doable because we have 29 plus states in DC that are doing medical programs. So I think the first step that you're going to see on the federal side will be allowing for transfer of medical marijuana between states that allow for medical marijuana. That will allow us to go interstate commerce. That will in fact allow us to ship by air or by water to other states that are not adjacent to us. And that's a key component that we need to actually expand this out as Adam would like to do. And the other thing I think that we need to do for diversion and dealing with this is taking off the 20-pound limit for medical transfers into the recreational system. If we have a problem, and we've heard from Billy Williams, we've heard from others that it is the outdoor growing in Southern Oregon, the place, the birth spot for medical production, why don't we allow them to get their product, whatever excess they have after they take care of their patients, into the system? Again, if you want to deal with diversion, this is the way to do it. So the last thing I want to bring up to you is I think is something that we've heard from some of the discussions this morning and why it's so important. We need to ensure that we maintain the continuity that we have today with the growers from yesterday that are here now in multiple generations. We cannot let them fall off the wayside because they don't have the capital to compete. I'm looking for ways that we can do that, and I think there's a couple of things that we need to be stressing. Number one, we need to have research on the attributes of medical applications. That is something that we have. We have put in place a research component, and we do have the commission that's working on this, but I do think it's something that we need to keep in mind. We can't lose track of. This is one of those areas that I think that we can have another license under OLCC. I've talked to them briefly. They haven't warmed up to it completely. But we could have a license that allows for a rider for medical growers to actually be able to file with the agency, or a particular agency, could be Oregon Health Authority, the attributes of their strains. It's anecdotal. I know it's not backed by scientific research, but until the feds open that door, we can't do that. But what we can do is we can continue to establish what the different strains that are being grown here, what they're been beneficial for, and then we'll have that in our back pocket when we start seeing national research going. We'll be already demarking that market. I think the last thing that we need to do in this area is see genetics. This is one of those areas that if you think back, for those who are in the room, think about the Graduate movie, when William Brooks said to Dustin Hoffman, just one word, plastics. What if that word would have been cannabis? What if that word would have been in the application of how you actually make your product available and stronger for whatever the needs of the market? Our seed genetics is where we have, as a state, because of all the work that has been done in historical perspective, if we can maintain that, we will be an exporting state of not only product, but seeds to other parts of the world, because everyone knows what the brand we have here is what they want to actually duplicate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I did want to make an announcement because I have been told that we have got the AC, that we got the AC blasting. So we're cooling it off in here because it got a little hot. I think we got time for one, maybe two questions for Ngayo, if you can flag them down.
Maybe not a question for me, but a question for the panel. Oh, I have a question. I know that Germany, or rather Canada, is exporting medical cannabis to Germany and other countries right now. Do you think Oregon or some of these West Coast states going to get involved in international cannabis exporting as well, or are you trying to keep it just on a national level?
Well, I'd love to have us right there competing with Canada on the international market.
We could beat Canada. Our weed's way
Well,
better.
there's no doubt that we can, but there are sisters too. So remember, as the Cascadia region, we want to be all inclusive. But the reality is, we are not going to be able to do that until we have movement on the federal side, until they actually, and this is part of the interstate commerce. And when we talk about interstate commerce, we actually are talking not only interstate within the U.S., but internationally, because once that happens, the doors open, as Canada and Germany has already shown us.
I have a quick, it's actually a group of questions, but I know they don't have time for them. But the main part about it is, as a small recreational grower that's gone through all the hoops and spent all the money, and we're the ones being hit the hardest in this industry, do you guys, are you looking at the implications of allowing us to be cross-bordering with California, which has so much money and so much size and so much different regulations? I just see that that's going to destroy the small growers, including also discussion on genetics. Genetics should be open. If genetics are protected, Monsanto-type companies are going to come in and take over. So I think that, I mean, all you guys up there, are you guys thinking about the small independent growers who are in Oregon suffering right now with an overabundance? Even the 20-pound increase, you're talking about allowing more product that's not been regulated into our very tightly overpopulated marketplace.
So just to address.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Just to address a piece of that, in terms of opening borders, obviously if we can export, you're opening borders for product to come in. But at this moment, it would not be a really good business decision for almost anyone to send cannabis into Oregon, right? I mean, you can smuggle cocaine into Bolivia if you want, but it loses a lot of its value when it gets there, right? And so it's the same, we're in that, by the time we get to a point where somebody wants to send cannabis in here for commercial reasons, it'll mean that we've stabilized our prices. Right, and so we need to get there first before we worry about, California. California and Oregon are both obviously going to be export states. To the extent that we can work with each other to break a hole in that wall, and I met with the same folks from California that Senator Prozanski met with, the rural counties, and they're really interested in this. If we can work together to do that, then we can set a precedent and we can all get it out.
So let me also follow up for the small recreational growers. You have a product, I assume, that you are very proud of in the strains that you do. Guess what? The people on the other side of the borders want that product because it's been regulated, it's been tested, and you've got quality product as compared to someone else. That's why I think the small businesses will in fact be able to compete here. I actually think it's the lifeline as compared to having this market flooded by everyone. Now, on the genetics, to me, the part is very important. You're correct. It needs to be open. What we don't want to see is the mass pharma or whoever else come in here and take control. How else are we going to do that if we don't have our own research happening here and ensuring that we have that viability for our small businesses? And again, once we have that research, I'll just name out one person, Seth Crawford, who gave us a lot of testimony back in 2015 and 2016. He and his brother have been working on genetics outside on their farm, outside of Corvallis, and they're into stuff that, I mean, it's above my head, let's just say that. And it's just amazing of what they're looking at, and as we know, how many cannabinoids are in marijuana that have not been researched, have not been identified. And it seems important to me that we have that type of research being done, sanctioned within the state, so we can have our state to be a medical research as well as just a seed generating research facility, that people come to Oregon to find out what's best.
Thank you. Let's hear it again for Anthony, the entire panel. That was great. It was in depth. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's kind of wild.